Kia ora, I'm Chris Nichol. Joy Cowley is one of New Zealand's best-known authors. Her books have sold by the truckload and been bread and butter for generations of New Zealanders. Mrs. Wishy-Washy in particular has been part of the furniture at our place for the last 25 years. This book, Hunter, recently won her the Junior Fiction Prize at the Montana Book Awards, just one of dozens of prizes she's received. Joy's been a writer for most of her adult life, and while she's been a Catholic for much of that time too, religion has played a pivotal role for her for as long as she can remember.
I can remember when I was 4 years old standing on a tree stump and singing a hymn and reaching up trying to touch God, and it just didn't happen. God felt like air. It didn't work very well. But there was a hunger, there was a thirst there. And somehow it was slightly satisfied by trotting along to Sunday school, by listening to hymns. Not entirely satisfied, because it was also there in cuddling a kitten or seeing a butterfly land on a flower. But I think that if we got rid of all religion, where would we place our sense of holy awe, our sense of wonder?
It provides the kind of language and the content.
I think so. What we would have to do is start inventing ritual.
Right.
Yeah, and then that would become religion. So there is something there that is a part of us. It's atavistic, it's part of our nature. And we cater very well for our intellectual, physical, emotional well-being, but we sometimes neglect our spiritual part.
May Almighty God have mercy on us, forgive us of our sin, and bring us to everlasting life.
You grew up in quite a conservative Christian home.
Very conservative, very punitive, but that's really where my parents were at. Neither of them was well. Right. And so life was very difficult for them, and they projected that on their surroundings. And of course, when people are in that situation too, they appeal to God for help, and anything that gets in the way of that help, they put onto the other side, the dark side. So the devil got very bad press in our family.
The devil was alive and well.
Oh, well, I can remember when I was about 7 or 8 praying that God would make the devil good, because I thought that would solve everybody's problems. And then I got very worried in case my mother knew that I was doing that.
Were you a part of a larger family?
I was the eldest of 5, and having ill parents, that meant that in some ways I had to learn to become mother at quite an early age. I did all the cooking in the house from the age of 10. But I think that's become my vocation. Whatever I do under the umbrella of mother. It became ingrained at an early age. School was difficult to begin with, because I went to a number of schools by the time I was about 8. And I didn't learn to read until I was nearly 9.
Oh, really?
I was a very slow learner. I still am in many respects, but in those days there were a lot of reasons for it: absenteeism, different schools, and a reading system that I didn't relate to, being a visual learner.
Yes. So what finally triggered reading for you?
Story.
Story
was very important. And when I read my first book, which I can remember, it was a book called Ping by...
Yes, I know
You
it.
know Ping?
Copy at home, yes.
Yes, well, Ping was published in the 1930s. And that was the first book that I remember reading. And I got so excited by it. Obviously, skills had come together in that book. And I had this wonderful adventure sitting in the safety of my desk, got lost and found again, like Ping. And I couldn't bear for it to finish, so I started it again. And I discovered that it was exactly the same with the second reading. I discovered the constancy of print. Now, in a world where everything shifted around me, everything changed, nothing seemed stable, that was very important to me, that print was constant.
And you began to write story as well. What were you doing when you were writing stories?
Well, what we all do, I guess. I was empowering myself.
Mm-hmm.
When we write, when we communicate in story, we are feeding ourselves spiritually, I believe.
So what was the next turning point in your life?
When I was in my sixth form year, my parents had wanted me to leave school and go to work, and my teachers intervened. They got me a job as the children's page editor of the Manawatu Daily Times. So there I was, 15 and 16, editing the children's page, working after school, and staying in Palmerston North with some people who lived near the school. And that was just a glorious year. I went home at the weekends. And the paper offered me a cadetship. Now, it was very unusual in those days for a girl to be offered a cadetship. And I was so excited. I couldn't wait to get home to tell my parents. And they said no. They said that all reporters, they were on their way to hell, and I'd been too much under their influence already, and no, I had to get a job near home, and they got me an apprenticeship with a local pharmacist.
Well, that was
So that was
devastating.
a big bite of reality, and not easy to take. I hadn't done science or maths at school, so then I was doing a pharmacy apprenticeship, and the first 2 years were very hard, but I needed that discipline and thinking that came with that. So ultimately, it was a very valuable experience. About the time I was finishing my apprenticeship, I got pregnant. And got married in those days when that happened. So I married a young man when I was 20, and he wasn't all that happy about it. His parents insisted. And I had 4 children in almost as many years, and lived and worked on a farm.
But it didn't work for him.
It didn't work for him, and then he met someone whom he did love. And
How did that affect you, Joy?
well, terrible feeling of defeat, actually. I worked hard on the farm, and I tried to be a dutiful wife, to do all the things, because this is 1950s stuff, you remember. And it didn't work for him, and I didn't understand why it didn't. And he thought that he might get it out of his system, and he suggested that I move out, and I took the children and moved out. And I wasn't there for very long before he picked up the children after school and took them back. And
So you lost the children.
yes. And of course I immediately went to a lawyer and said, he's taken my children. And the lawyer said, well, what will happen is probably that if you go to the courts, the boys will go to the father and the girls will go to the mother. We've got 4 children in 4 years, and they're all so close, and they needed each other.
Yes.
And what was I to do? I really couldn't do anything. I wandered around for about 3 weeks, I think, just crying. Every time I picked up a little sock or a toy. Yeah. And I wasn't sleeping, and I got a prescription for butabarbital, Sonoril. And I'd done pharmacy. I knew what the lethal dose was, and it was a completely irrational thing. I tipped the bottle into my hand, new prescription, 20 tablets, put 2 back in the bottle in case I needed them, and then took the rest.
Right.
So
at one level you knew what you were doing.
and the other,
didn't.
it was irrational, yeah. But that was pivotal. That was the whole turning point in my life that was quite extraordinary.
Tell me more about that.
The near-death experience. Yes. It's hard to describe it when you're not operating within the normal set of senses. And it's beyond our normal perception. Except that it's the experience that most people do describe of moving very rapidly into a light, which is quite unlike light as we know it. It's not that physical light that we know from the sun or light around us. It's a presence. It's another state of being, and moving very fast into it. But there were 2 things. One was there was absolute knowledge. There was nothing I didn't know.
Right.
Also, there was sort of an exultant laughter within me my last conscious thought was, how could I have forgotten? Because I had done this so many times. And it was like waking up to reality after a short and troubled sleep. Yeah, it was.
So a sense of coming home
Oh,
almost.
absolutely. And being almost there and being sort of very involved in this light and melting into it, and then falling back into darkness and pain and voices. And I was in an intensive care unit, and it was 3 days later. And it seemed to take about 20 seconds.
Yes.
Yes.
Wow.
So, and I wasn't in good shape. I was paralysed and blind at that stage. But something had happened. There'd been a major internal shift. In fact, that sense of change was so great that I imagined that perhaps I had died, and this was an illusion.
Right.
And
It was as profound as that.
Because it was very profound.
Yeah.
And I went back to the house, I got a job, I went back into a pharmacy, and there was a strong sense of presence that my life was being managed for me too, almost, and that things started to move very positively, that I had ceased to be just one small isolated being, that I was part of universal energy, if you like, part of something that I couldn't explain, couldn't describe, but which linked back to that feeling of presence that had always been lurking there.
Right, and continues to accompany you.
Oh, yes, yes.
You remarried?
Yes, yes. And I met Malcolm Mason, who's 25 years older than I am, and a wonderful man. And of course the children came back to me. And,
Right.
Yeah, so, and we had 14 great years together before he got cancer.
Now, this poor tiger had a bad tooth, and I went with him to the dental nurse.
My interest in writing for children began with a son who wasn't learning to read. And I worked with him, with other children in school, and eventually went over to writing for children, especially for children who were reluctant readers.
Tiger sat in the chair. He didn't like the drill.
Stories must affirm a child. They must be child-friendly, child-centred. And I try to use humour. No child can be tense when they're laughing. And the third thing I found was useful was to put a little twist at the end. It was a bit like having pudding after vegetables. You know, get them to read to the end of the story.
Then what can he eat, I said. The same as other tigers, she said. So, my tiger ate the dental nurse.
You came to marry Terry. Tell us that story.
Terry was Malcolm's friend, and I saw quite a bit of Terry during the time of the funeral and after Malcolm died. And we were good friends. There wasn't anything romantic. We were just good friends. And we worked together on a couple of books. He took the photographs, I wrote the reflections. It's a book called Aotearoa Psalms. And he used to phone me fairly regularly. And one night, about 5 years after Malcolm had died, he was talking and he says that he wanted to get married. Actually, his words were, "Bugger this, I want to get married." And I thought he'd met someone.
Right.
And I was waiting for him to tell me about her. And then he said, "What do you think about that?" And I realised he meant me. And my reaction was actually surprising. I thought, what a good idea.
Lord, I am not worthy to receive you, but only say the word, and I shall be healed.
I didn't realise, of course, that the church would get very upset by this, because Terry was a priest, and we got a lot of support from clergy, but not so much support from lay people.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it is. I dare say they just weren't able to cope with it. So we got a few anonymous letters.
You've tasted a lot of different religious traditions. You've come to a place in relation to the Catholic tradition in particular.
That wasn't a choice, actually. I can't say that I was led into the Catholic Church. I'd say I was driven into it because it wasn't something that I chose actually to explore. But I've been reading a lot of the mystics, Christian mystics. And it was the Swami I knew, this Vedantist Swami, who said, one day I was talking about St. Francis, and he said, "The Divine Mother is calling you to be a Catholic." He said, "You're like a hen, scratching here, scratching there. That is no way to dig a well." Now, that statement was profoundly meaningful for me. That is no way to dig a well. The point is I needed the disciplines of one path.
The Lord be with you. And also with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
There was a time when I dropped the word God too, because it had become too small for me. It carried all the baggage of the past. So I was doing a lot of reading, philosophy and religions, and I used words like the Tao and the prime mover and the first cause and cosmic consciousness,
Yes.
And then I found that God was a lot easier to say. But I came back to that with a whole new awareness.
So when you say God as a word was too small for you, what do you mean?
I mean that it carried the baggage of the past, the old man with the beard,
Right.
and the punitive judge.
Right. The connotations of the conservative Christianity of your past.
Yes. So it carried all that. And I needed to let go of that and then rediscover what I experienced God to be. If there is one image which is very meaningful, it's God as lover, and that's without gender. It's the lover of the soul. And I do have that sensation of this profound and deep love.
How does Joy Cowley structure her devotional life?
I try to practice being in the present moment. That's impossible, of course, because there's always thinking of the past, there's always projection into the future, but times of awareness, I try very hard to stay in the present moment and just to actively use my senses. And if we just do that simple exercise of seeing beyond seeing, hearing beyond hearing, of being physically present to the world, it's amazing how much of ourselves we discover in connection with that world. And extraordinary things will happen. Also, there's a practice of daily meditation, prayer, and Terry and I go to daily Mass because the sacraments are very important to us.
As well, because of what they symbolise?
Yes. Because they are food for the soul. Yeah.
The body of Christ. The body of Christ.
Everything about the church and the structure is designed to take you to that point where words leave off, into the heart of mystery. That's where I found a home, because it's open-ended.
How do you see the relationship between different religions?
I see the relationship between different religions as being very close at a certain point in journey. If you could take the metaphor of a circle and we journey in towards the centre, at the early journey we seem to be very far apart. In fact, some traditions will seem to be opposite us, but as we come into that centre of light, the paths become very close and they all join in that centre of light. And if you take the writings from the mystical traditions of all the religions, they're almost interchangeable. The only things that are different are the cultural references.
So when the tradition tells Christians there is no salvation outside the church, what do you make of that kind of comment?
It's politics. Yeah. But actually, if we let go of our fears, we realise that our own faith is confirmed by other religions, not threatened. We realise that the hunger for God is the human condition.
It's part of what it is to be a human being.
It is. And how we recognise that, how we deal with that, really depends on our culture and who we are.
Obviously, there are lots of religious believers who can't cope with that. How do you respond to that?
I would say to someone who couldn't cope with it, let it go. Whatever someone says to you, hold it in an open hand. If it's not relevant to you, let it go. But stay on your journey, and one day, maybe it will be relevant to you.
You mentioned Aotearoa Psalms. How long have you been writing specifically spiritual literature?
Well, always for myself.
Yes.
I started writing that for a Catholic magazine called Zelandi. They asked me if I would write for it. I did it with some trepidation because I thought they were very personal. Right. They were my own.
They were written for you yourself.
Yeah, they were for myself. And I really did feel that I was sort of dancing nude on a tabletop. It was... and of course, I made the mistake of assuming that these reflections were just given to me alone. But they were that again. It was common experience.
There are times in life when we are called to be bridges, not a great monument spanning a distance and carrying loads of heavy traffic, but a simple bridge to help one person from here to there over some difficulty such as pain, grief, fear, loneliness, a bridge which opens the way for ongoing journey. When I become a bridge for another, I bring upon myself a blessing, for I escape from the small prison of self and exist for a wider world, breaking out to be a larger being who can enter another person's pain and rejoice in another's triumph.
It's interesting that the people who identify with those books come from all traditions. Mm-hmm. I have a friend, she's Islamic, she's from Bahrain, and she has got Aotearoa Psalms, and she wrote back and used an Islamic expression. She said, God walks in you. I like that Islamic expression. People use it when they experience what they feel to be holiness in anything.
They seem to have struck a chord with people, a freshness that we can articulate our own indigenous spirituality or personal spirituality.
Well, they are connecting with us in Aotearoa now, and they're not in an ecclesiastical language, they're in the language of life experience, and what I like to call the gospel of our lives.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you think religious language has got trapped in its own genre?
I think so. I think it's very difficult for people coming in from the outside.
A lot of the language, I'm thinking of a word like discipline. It sounds almost sadomasochistic. How do you understand? How would you liberate a word like discipline?
Discipline. Well, it's like piano practice.
and you've just taken up the piano.
Yes. It's like jogging. It's like going to the gym. It's about spiritual fitness. Think of the words from Desiderata. Be on a wholesome discipline. Be gentle with yourself. I like those words. I like those two in context. Discipline is not about being hard on oneself.
How long have you been learning the piano?
Oh, well, I bought a piano when I was 61 because, I always got all bitter and twisted about the fact that I couldn't learn to play the piano when I was a kid. I've always loved music. And I tried teaching myself, and that wasn't working very well. So I decided to do exams, and I got a teacher, and yes.
That's good. What?
Well, next week I've got grade 4 exams. Yes, next week.
Good luck.
Theory and practical. They're my first exams, so I decided to start there and hopefully go on It's a bit hard at my age because I have to learn everything about 7 times because I forget.
Tell me about the place and the sounds.
Everyone knows that the Sounds is a very healing place. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to build a little house there that would be available for folk? People coming out of hospital, people with terminal illness who want to spend time with relatives there. Families who had never had a holiday. And yes, so we ran it for nearly 20 years. I on my own for a while, and then Terry too. And what we used to do is try and offer people just family care. It's quite simple, really. Yeah. I think that we have always found the hospitality we've received from people is a great gift, and we just try to give that back.
You've explored the relationship between being human and being spiritual. Which do you feel is our natural or the better expression of who we are?
I can't separate them, Chris, because I would say that to be fully human is realising that divine spark within us. And it means using all our talents, all our gifts, and it means not being afraid. Sometimes people will bury those talents through fear. And that fear may be imposed on them by others, they might impose it on themselves. It's so important that we are true to ourselves, who we are. That must be wonderful. They would also get the southerly in the storm.
They would, yes.
I've been asked for some time by a publisher to do a biography, and I've cringed at that. I just know that's just too small. One person's story is too small. And I have said so. And then I've gone back to them and said, look, how about a story of stories, other people's stories, so many interesting people I've met, and a story set in the Sounds with a lot of the lore of the ocean and the land and the Sounds, which we know so well. And I think I'd call the book Navigation, because that's what life's about.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.